Let's go ahead and talk about our saint of the day. Saint Rosalia, patron saint of Palermo. Saint Rosalia, a 12th century Sicilian noblewoman, is revered as the patron saint of Palermo. Her life, marked by seclusion, asceticism, and a deep spiritual connection, has captivated devotees for centuries. After renouncing her worldly life, Rosalia retreated to a cave on Mount Pellegrino, a prominent landmark overlooking Palermo. There she lived a life of solitude, prayer, and self-denial. She sought to completely detach herself from the temptations and distractions of the world, focusing solely on a relationship with God. Her remains were not discovered until centuries after her death. And actually in 1625, during a plague that ravaged Palermo, a hunter stumbled upon a cave there and found her skeleton. Now, discovery was seen as a miracle, and the plague subsided. St. Rosalia is credited with interceding on behalf of the city. Now, her feast day is celebrated today, September 4th, with great fervor. The city actually hosts a procession in her honor, during which an ornate casket is carried through the streets. It's incredible. Check it out. But St. Rosalia, pray for us. Now, coming up next, kind of continuing this conversation of asceticism, we're going to bring you little ways to bring self-control to help you do the next right thing. Coming up here on Morning Joy, where truth matters.
You're listening to Morning Joy, where truth matters.
Welcome back to Morning Joy, where truth matters. I'm your host, Keith Downey, and on The Next Right Thing with Debbie Georgianni and Adam Blai, talking about the little ways to bring self-control through something called asceticism. What even is that, and how can we apply it to our daily lives? Well, I won't give it away. Here's Debbie Georgianni and Adam Blai. Good morning.
Good morning, Keith. Thank you so much. Yes, asceticism is from the Greek word ascesis, which means practice, bodily exercise, and also athletic training. But we know that the early Christians used it as a practice of the spiritual things to get someone to elevate and for the purpose of acquiring the habits of virtue. So with this wonderful saint that you mentioned, of the saint of the day, Saint Rosalia from Sicily, which I love, Adam and I we're going to continue the conversation about asceticism and how you can put it into practice in your life, beginning today in small ways so that it can spiritually benefit you. Adam.
So, yes, St. Rosalia is associated with asceticism because that was part of her practice. You know, as you mentioned, Deb, it was the early desert fathers and desert mothers that were emulating Jesus's 40-day fast in the desert that a lot of our stories and ideas about asceticism come from. And these were people that really, stepped out of the world in kind of a radical way, pursuing God and trying to not be distracted by the world. And, the most famous of those is perhaps St. Anthony of the Desert, or Antony of the Desert, who was, one of the very first desert fathers and considered kind of the founder of monasticism for the world, or at least a model for it. So it's a deep historical part of Christianity that goes all the way back to Jesus, of course. And the idea of fasting in association with prayer and spiritual practices is pretty universal in the world across all different religions. There's definitely something there that God has placed. So, what is the point of all this? Well, it's self-denial for a spiritual reason, and that spiritual reason is to get oriented to God and get closer to God. That's the hope of the ascetic. They're trying to not be distracted by the world and by the creation because they're trying to focus on the Creator. And that involves not just pursuing wealth and food and pleasure, but trying to focus on the God that is behind all of that, in a sense, because we can basically dissipate our lives and, in a sense, waste them just pursuing things that don't last. Of course, what lasts is God, and we hope for heaven, and the world ultimately fails us and falls away as we age and eventually die. Okay, so it's kind of based on seeing that reality. Now, as we gain control of appetites and our urges, we're less likely to be lost and dominated by them. So if you think of perhaps, addictions where people have become basically kind of helpless, or they feel helpless to control an urge, like drinking or smoking or other things where the body feels like it's, demanding these things. And I'm sure you encounter this in life coaching. We have certainly encountered this in psychology, working with drug and alcohol issues, particularly in prison. So, Deb, as we control little things, here's where it really, I think we see a lot of the benefit for us. As we control little things, we practice with little things, we increase our willpower and our confidence that we're able to overcome an urge. If we just give in to every little urge that we have, and we just give in to it, we kind of train ourselves to feel helpless. We train ourselves that, well, I just have to follow every little urge and need that I feel in my body and in my life. And if other people tell me I'm supposed to have these things, well, I'm just going to do it. And it trains us to feel helpless. Well, what happens when temptation comes? What happens when a strong temptation, maybe even backed up by advertising in the world and people that maybe don't have our best interest at heart? Well, our willpower is kind of weakened there. Our confidence in ourselves is weak. So part of asceticism for us living in the world is to increase that confidence so that when temptation comes, we might be a little bit stronger in resisting it. Do you have any thoughts on that, Deb?
Well, yeah, that's why when I shared the root word for asceticism, talking about athletic training. So when you look at an athlete that goes into a workout or the gym or wherever they're practicing to perform in a great way, they're constantly repeating that and getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And so it is this training so that we can overcome all these temptations, the small ones that are coming at us on a regular basis, so that when the big ones come, we have the ability to fight it and fight it in a way that is going to produce like Saint Jerome said, this true perfection. So asceticism has a much bigger meaning than when we hear about it or we learn about it. We want to make sure that we understand it in a concrete way, in a small way now, and practice it step by step, so that it is something that works for us spiritually. It's a huge thing to do on a regular basis. And you were mentioning, Adam, about addiction. Obviously with your extensive mental health background, you're spot on. With addictions or other things that just overwhelm people, that's all they can think about. So for them to have any type of training put into place when they are under that huge burden of having to deal with an addiction, it is very difficult for them. So that's why it's true for all of us, because we're dealing in the world. So the world is overwhelming us. So that's why baby stepping it towards this practice of true perfection is really the way to go.
Yeah, and asceticism, the self-denial that's involved there, it's not just fasting from food or, say, alcohol, but that's really the most common one that we hear discussed. So we can deny ourselves certain vices. Perhaps if the internet is a huge time sink for us and isn't producing anything good, and we're spending hours on it a day, maybe we deny ourselves, an hour or two, and we shut the phone off and we shut everything down and we focus on something good. It could take that form, but the fasting is the most common, and it's easy to talk about and think about. We all get it. We all know what it feels like to feel hungry. So let's look at a couple scriptures real fast to see what the Bible tells us about fasting and how it works in the spiritual life. Let's look at Matthew 6:16 to 18. When you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, They neglect their appearance so that they may appear to others to be fasting. Amen, I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, so that you may not appear to others to be fasting, except to your Father who is hidden. And your Father who sees what is hidden will repay you. So here we have a clue that the Father finds something valuable in fasting, and that it brings grace to us. That last little phrase there, the Father will repay you. So we see that fasting brings grace. Let's look at Isaiah 58:6. Is this not rather the fast that I choose, releasing those bound unjustly, untying the thongs of the yoke, setting free the oppressed, breaking off every yoke? Is it not sharing your bread with the hungry, bringing the afflicted and the homeless into your home, clothing the naked when you see them, and not turning your back on your own flesh? Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your wound shall quickly be healed. Your vindication shall go before you, and the glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. So here we see that fasting leads to blessings. Now let's touch on Daniel 10:3. This is a really interesting one, Deb. This is what's called the Daniel fast. Daniel is in captivity, and the king of Persia is encouraging him to drink alcohol and eat the rich and fatty foods that's the normal diet in Persia. Here we read, I ate no savory food, took no meat or wine, and did not anoint myself at all until the end of the 3 weeks. On the 24th day of the first month, I was on the bank of the great river, the Tigris. As I looked up, I saw a man dressed in linen with a belt of fine gold around his waist. His body was like chrysolite, his face shone like lightning. His eyes were like fiery torches. His arms and feet looked like burnished bronze, and the sound of his voice was like the roar of a multitude. So here, Deb, this is interesting. We were talking about this before the show, and you wanted to emphasize the point that asceticism doesn't guarantee mysticism.
Mm-hmm.
So we see in the other readings that fasting has a value to God, and it brings blessing, it brings grace. But here we see Daniel fasting, and it brings a divine messenger, probably an angel, perhaps Jesus, but there's a divine figure who appears to him. He has a vision. Are we supposed to say that God is guaranteed to give us visions and divine inspiration, Deb, when we fast?
No, but what I got to hold you there for a minute, because I just got the signal from our producer Tim, who's saying we only have less than a minute. But I want to pick up. I want you to rewind a little bit when we come back from the break, and let's talk about this idea, because some people do mix asceticism with mysticism, and that could be problematic. That's not the general use or the practice of it. So it's really for this idea of going back what you said, Adam, about this training. So if we can focus on that, because I think it ties in beautifully to what we're all dealing with today with all the temptation. And Adam, you're also going to bring up from recent sessions something that happened, and so that can enlighten us. Let's hold it there. Let's send it back to Keith. He's got some announcements, and then he will happily shoot it back to us so we can finish the next right thing on asceticism.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Debbie and Adam. And yeah, a quick shout out for all of those individuals that are watching or streaming live from all the social media aspects. But we do offer an additional way to watch or listen. Well, I should say listen to Morning Joy. It's through podcasting, kind of the original way that online presence gave before kind of YouTube and everything of that nature. So if you're wanting a flexible way to enjoy Morning Joy, the best way to do it would be to download podcast in its podcast form from anywhere that you listen to any podcasts. Just search Morning Joy, and don't forget also to check out the Spirit World. That is also available on the same platforms you typically find any of your podcasts. But yes, coming up next, we're going to be talking about why asceticism is not mysticism. It's all about saying no to the small things so we're able to say yes when God asks us to do the greater things from us. So stay tuned. We're going to talk more on this right after this break on Morning Joy, where truth matters.
You're listening to Morning Joy, where truth matters.
Welcome back to Morning Joy, where truth matters. I'm Keith Downey, your host, and we are continuing the conversation in the final segment here of the Next Right Thing, all about asceticism, what it is and what it isn't. Specifically now, what it isn't. And without further ado, we have Debbie Georgianni and Adam Blai to take it away.
Thanks, Keith. Okay, Adam, we're going to have to move quickly. So back to what maybe we should do a whole segment on the Next Right Thing on mysticism, because that's something I really love to talk about. But asceticism has to do with the moral virtues, and mysticism is a state that is very different. Now, they work together, but it's not, you don't, some people feel that asceticism kind of leads into mysticism. That it doesn't always do that. I mean, God can show himself wherever he needs to do that. But I just want to make that distinction. Asceticism for most of us is this idea of this spiritual practice for what Saint Jerome said, for that true perfection, so that we can develop the virtues, so that we have that strength, so we can pretty much fight the temptations that are coming at us. Why don't you talk a little bit about that real quickly, and then move on to the next topic, because I definitely want to get into what happened recently in one of your sessions.
Yeah, we don't want to treat kind of asceticism like magic, where, I do these things and that's going to compel or force God to show up and do something unusual, or that it makes me special before God and guarantees stuff. Like we saw with the readings we looked at, yes, it brings graces, and yes, there's power in fasting along with prayer, but these kind of unusual experiences like Daniel had there and so many saints have had, that's at God's choice, and it's not always the best thing for us, It's clear we don't have time to get into all the examples, but, Jesus was clear that looking for signs and unusual supernatural events, that's not the Christian life. That's not the pinnacle of the Christian life that we're after. We want to please God, we want union with God, but that isn't necessarily a consoling, mystical experience. Right. So we can kind of set the table with prayer and asceticism and the sacramental graces, but whether God shows up and sits down with us and does something unusual, God knows best what we need for our spiritual journey, and he doesn't want us to rely on looking for miracles and supernatural events. That's actually it's not healthy.
Well said. We don't have a lot of time. You wanted to share with all of us what happened recently. I thought that was very interesting.
So real quick, for context, Mark 9:25-29, Jesus, on seeing a crowd rapidly gathering, rebuked the unclean spirit and said to it, "Mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." Shouting and throwing the boy into convulsions, it came out. He became like a corpse, which caused many to say, "He is dead." But Jesus took him by the hand, raised him, and he stood up. When he entered the house, his disciples asked him in private, "Why could we not drive it out?" He said to them, "This kind can only come out through prayer," and in some translations, prayer and fasting. So this is the reference to prayer and fasting, that some demons that the apostles, his followers, could not drive out, through prayer and invoking his name, he brings up prayer and fasting, which is cited in the exorcism rituals, that the priest exorcist is encouraged to fast as much as is reasonable. So a couple weeks ago, Deb, this came up directly in one of our cases. It's one of our long-standing cases, and it was one of the main players downstairs. We were praying, and it basically cited this stuff. It said, and of course we've always cautioned, you have to be very cautious and basically don't listen to anything demons say voluntarily at exorcisms, because they lie. But in this case, you'll see why it's very possibly true. This creature said, you guys aren't going to get me out just through praying the exorcism, right? He requires, and they always just refer to Jesus as he. They never want to say his name. he requires one of you to pray and meditate for 21 days before I can be cast out. And it was a reference, it seems, directly to Scripture. And by giving a very, if it's true, and we are fasting and meditating, giving kind of a mechanism that God may require that is scriptural for this one to be cast out, it's at least worth doing. And the other thing is, good fruits come from that regardless. So if it is lying, there's good fruits for the person that's fasting or the people that are fasting. And when it said 21 days specifically, it said some of you or one of you has to fast and meditate for 21 days before he will cast me out, referring to Jesus. That is pretty clearly a reference to the Daniel fast that we talked about in Daniel 10:3. And one of the priests said, oh, that's the Daniel fast, in the midst of this encounter during the exorcism. So it's interesting. It seems to be playing out there. Now, people fast for short periods of time before exorcisms all the time, but this case is hopefully coming to an end, and we saw a direct reference to downstairs citing something positive from Scripture that it's possible God requires, and so we are going to do that. So do you have any reactions to that?
Yeah, I do, because we talk a lot about it on Take Two, actually, about fasting. That's when people start to see forward movement in things that are stuck in their lives. Mm-hmm. And so anytime you have this kind of thing that is preventing people to spiritually go deeper in their homes, and I'm applying it to everybody just in daily lives with like people they interact with, their family, their friends, their work, their situation in life. And fasting definitely can help in that area to push things through. But the idea of for the next right thing, I just want to encourage folks, it doesn't have to be extreme. A little bit of fasting goes a long way with God. If we can show that we will be able to pull back from things that we just fall into naturally because we desire them, or they're so enticing, or they just grab our attention and we go with it. If we can show that resistance in that way, it goes a long way spiritually, and it benefits people for themselves and for people around them. So I just want to encourage folks to please think about little tiny ways today you can start to fast. And Adam, you said it earlier, it can be the slightest thing, like, okay, I have 30 minutes to scroll up and down to check all my email and to check out the internet. Say to yourself, okay, I'm only going to do 20 minutes today. Okay, that 10 minutes can be applied to spiritually benefit you, to build up that strength. And you're right, Adam, there's going to be the bigger times where we're going to be faced with things, and if we don't have that training, we could fall very easily. It's that simple, because the world will overwhelm us. So I just want to encourage folks, start small and you'll see the benefits.
Yeah, so my 2 tips, and part of this comes from psychology, is pick something, as Deb said, something doable, something that's not too extreme and radical to change, to deny yourself for a period of time. Pick a period of time that's doable in the beginning. Start with baby steps. You'll build up your confidence and your willpower over time. And maybe pick something unhealthy to deny yourself of. Like if you're eating a lot of, say, rich, highly processed foods, right, maybe pick something that's unhealthy that you're regularly consuming to cut that out of your life for a period of time, and then you get the double benefit. You're practicing your fasting, but you're also helping your body.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Adam, we're going to get ready to close. This is excellent. I made a note of it. I think we should definitely dedicate the spirit world to asceticism and mysticism. I think that would be fascinating for our spirit world listeners. So we'll talk about it, and hopefully we'll put it on the calendar. But Adam, have a beautiful rest of your day. For now, we're going to send it back to Keith, because we've got the rest of Morning Joy.
Wow, thank you so much, Debbie and Adam. That was a great reflection on asceticism. And it reminded me back in the day when I did Exodus 90. I don't know if anybody knows what Exodus 90 is. It's like a program for men based on kind of asceticism and prayer life and fraternity. But it really was my first foray into asceticism. And it was funny because that word was relatively new to me as well. So trying to explain what asceticism was to someone who also doesn't know asceticism, it helped me learn about it all so quick. And another tip for those out there that, are wanting to take just small steps into doing asceticism, what I did was, because I love my coffee with creamer, some sweetened creamer, just not having creamer. Yeah, it'll change. It'll change it. I'm telling you. But yeah, make sure to catch the Spirit World coming up this Saturday. They're going to be talking about fear that is not coming from God. All right, so make sure to tune in 10 a.m. Central. But coming up next, we're talking about what to do and not to do after committing a sin right after this break on Morning Joy.
You're listening to Morning Joy, where truth matters.